Nearly 2 years ago, we had the release of Atomic Heart after years of hype and trailers that showcased the game. What we got, I thought, was a pretty good game that was sadly bogged down by a pretty poor script. The combat was fun and hectic, while still offering up a bit of a challenge depending on whatever abilities and weapons you wanted to run. I do think that the world exploration and the open world design itself could have been a little bit more fleshed out. The base game was fun, and it was actually one of the first reviews that I ever did on this channel. It's a review that I honestly look back at and I kind of cringe because of how bad I think it is. But it's cool to see how much progress I've made in those 2 years since. In that nearly 2 year time period, the developers Mundfish have put out three DLCs: Annihilation Instinct, which was released August 2023. Then you have the second one, Trapped in Limbo, which was released February 6th of 2024. And then the third DLC, which is what brings you here today. Enchantment Under the Sea is the third and most recent DLC to be released for Atomic Heart. It sees you entering the underwater Neptune complex that you get a brief glimpse of towards the end of the main game. So yes, this video is going to contain spoilers for the base game, as this is a continuation of that main storyline. So if you'd like to avoid any of those spoilers, this is your chance to click off. As I do with all my reviews, I like to start off with a little bit of a technical block. I went ahead and I played Atomic Heart on PC at 1440p with an i7 13700K and an RTX 4080 with all the graphical settings turned to their highest values, the DLSS set to quality, and frame generation set to on. This game remains just as good looking as I remember it looking some 2 years ago, and this is actually one of the first games that I got to play when I built my new computer, and it still is arguably one of the best looking games I've played at the time. The performance of the DLC was solid for the most part. In combat, it was pretty steady, but the areas where I would notice most of the frame dips and issues was when I was transitioning to a new area or zone within the facility. So if you're planning on playing, probably look at a video, maybe compare the specs of that video, see how it might run with you. Personally, the issues were pretty small and never enough to make me stop playing. The story of Enchantment Under the Sea picks up after the ending of the base game, more specifically after the events of the second DLC, where you're able to find the consciousness of one of the twins who is actually your wife, Katya. I know it's a lot to take in and a bit of a mindfuck, but just work with me here. Right off the bat, I love the tone of this DLC a lot more, so much more. Even just the location is better than the second one. I was not a fan of the whole CSGO surf design that they had in Trapped in Limbo. I appreciate that it moved the story along, but here in DLC 3, it's much more returned to the traditional gameplay of Atomic Heart that you're used to. Once you're outside of that main hall, you actually get to see how the whole place of Chelomane has went to complete and utter shit after the collective network went down, and your goal now is to track down the control rings or the beta rings that you tossed into the lake during the base game. These control rings give the wielder access to the collective, and this is going to be the main crux of the story. And it's actually not long till you're dropped off just outside of where you toss those rings into the water, and you can delve deeper into the countryside in hopes of gaining access to that underwater facility. The Neptune facility is something you do, like I said, get a peek of at the start of the game, and it's really cool to actually get down there and you can swim in the water. Sadly, there isn't much in terms of exploration in and around that area. I do wish there was more of that to do here in the DLC because it does feel pretty much on rails, unfortunately.
How's that?
Who knows? But getting eaten by something this huge does not make me happy.
This time around, the story and dialogue isn't going to be between P3 and Charles, but instead Katya, whose consciousness has now been transferred into that polymeric glove. The change of pace was pretty welcome this time around because one of the biggest questions, or at least mysteries, with the base game and what followed was the relationship that P3 and his wife had. If you played the base game, you know that they served in the military together, and after an accident, she was declared dead and P3 developed amnesia sort after. Only throughout the course of the main game does he start to reveal and remember fragments of his wife, and it's slowly revealed that she's actually split into two in the twins. So it's really nice to see the actual personality of Katya come out. You get to see her and P3 argue, obviously like a married couple. You get to see her worry and carry for P3 in ways that Charles did really not care for, so it's a nice touch to see. You also do get a new enemy type this time around, the coral monster. It's this giant ass crab. Think of something like from Aquaman. It can spin, attack, it can burrow into the ground. It's got a bunch of like mini versions. They're kind of a pain in the ass to deal with at times, but there's also a host of returning enemies like the mannequins, your normal robots, so pretty basic enemies. I do wish there was a little bit more in terms of variety for the enemies this time around, with you being on the ocean floor. I feel like they could have done a lot of cool shit with that instead of just doing the crab. There's also a couple of other characters you're going to be meeting along the way. The wolf, he's your typical muscle man guard who you really don't get to do much with at all. You also run into Nikolai, who is one of the station's scientists, played by YouTuber Kyle Hill, who I guess is a huge fan of the game and has done a couple of videos. So I think that's pretty cool to see. Then lastly, you have Nastia, a dolphin trainer and scientist, and sadly you don't get to do much with her or really many of the side characters, unfortunately. The side characters really aren't that important or impactful for me this time around. I just saw them as people that P3 was going to help because they're on his way. Plus, they knew the inner workings of the facility, so it was probably in his best interest. There's actually a little bit of a moral dilemma where Katya suggests that you should actually leave them behind early on, and this will only slow you guys down. P3 doesn't really roll with that, and they don't expand on this anymore, but I think it would have been pretty interesting to maybe have a choice where you can, or, maybe you don't save them, and then you can see how it changes the rest of the DLC and how it plays out. In total, this DLC is going to run you about 3-ish hours, depending on how quick you progress through some of the combat encounters and the traversal sequences. And it's pretty on par with the last 2 expansions, but personally, I just wish that they were a little bit longer, considering it's almost a year wait in between. But for the price tag of $10, it's pretty on par with Trapped in Limbo and Annihilation Instinct. As it was with Annihilation Instinct, you're actually going to be able to get a few new weapons this go around with DLC 3. The biggest and the best being the Spaz 12 shotgun that you can just spam bullets into with enemies, but it also comes with an alternate firing mode that shoots a grenade. Other new weapon is a melee flail that you can use when enemies are close, and then you can utilize the heavy attack, which sort of extends the end of the flail out, allowing you to do some range damage. You also get a grappling hook, which is mostly going to be used during traversal sequences, but you can actually use it during combat encounters to pull you to enemies and then pull you up and around enemies during combat sequences. There's also a fireball ability called Blaze that you can get. It's pretty basic, nothing too special. So there's a good amount in terms of new abilities and weapons that you're going to have access to in this DLC. So you should get them all within about the first hour or so. These weapons and abilities can be upgraded at the polymer stations, just like in the base game. They've got their own suite of perks that you can choose from, but sadly you can't bring any of these back to the base game. So that's a bit of a bummer. While I enjoyed Enchantment Under the Sea, I do just wish that the DLC as a whole was a little bit longer, possibly leaning more into those Bioshock influences and vibes, which I originally thought was what we were going to be getting here. When you're actually underwater amidst the lake floor swimming, I think that's when the DLC is at its best. But the moment that you do that really doesn't last longer than 10 minutes. So you do get a couple new weapons, you get a couple new abilities that you can play around with, but the characters sadly don't give you much to do. Really, what I'm mostly invested in at this point is the personal story of P3 and Katya. So if you enjoyed the base game of Atomic Heart, I think this is probably something that you're going to enjoy. I think it's easily, if you own the season pass, it's worth downloading, giving it a shot. And if you just want to try it out on its own, you can pick it up for about $10 or, like I said, $40 as part of the season pass, which will come with all the expansions, which at this rate, I'm going to guess will wrap up sometime in 2026 or maybe this fall. But I'm really excited to see how they wrap it up here in DLC 4. And if you did enjoy the video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe so you can stay up to date on all my reviews and previews dropping in the coming weeks. I might have one for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. That one's still TBD. I will for sure have one for Avowed, so if either of those interest you, hit that subscribe button and ring that bell. And as always, if you did make it this far, I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day. And this has been my review for Atomic Heart's third DLC, Enchantment Under the Sea. Thank you for watching.
Find the rings. Second chances don't come often, son. Don't miss it.